So, what we're going to be talking about in the next 25 or so minutes is looking at the genre from an industry and data perspective, exploring some of the changes that have happened, some of the growth areas, looking at the demographics of artists and the fan base as well. We've got a lot of data experts on the panel, so my job should be quite easy. I will ask the questions and on you go. I just wanted to start actually quickly with Rufy, who put together a fantastic report from our lovely partners who've provided us data, so Beatport, Believe, and Chartmetric. She's going to just give us a few highlights from the report, and we are going to share that report with everyone that's attended today once we finalised it with a bit more data that's coming in, so that everyone can actually see a spotlight on jungle and drum and bass as a genre with data and numbers against it, because it's an important genre that needs to be celebrated by the music industry and recognised for the force that it is. So, Rufy, if you want to give us a couple of highlights.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'll be looking at my phone because I don't want to get the numbers wrong. So just a few highlights from the report, and obviously before I start, thank you to Chartmetric, Beatport, Believe for giving us all this information. Thank you very much. So I'm going to start with Beatport, which had a big year in 2024 for the genre, 7.45% of total sales for the genre, and it has had 5 number one hits since 2004 on the platform, which were jungle and drum and bass, which is pretty cool if you think about it, the amount of music that's released to have 5 number one hits. It's also the third best-selling genre for catalog releases and the second best for new releases on Beatport. Again, pretty cool. And then the revenue jumped 51% in 2024 on Believe. 51% is a pretty big number. And then this one I particularly find pretty cool, which is the Chartmetric data. So the Chartmetric tracks 11 million artists and then out of that, 21 jungle drum and bass artists make it to the top 10,000. So if you put it into perspective, 11 million and having 21 top drum and bass artists is pretty impressive. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that.
Fantastic, thanks. So yeah, just to summarise, so 50% year-on-year increase for jungle drum and bass on Believe, which is one of the distributors that distribute the most drum and bass and jungle labels, I think is fair to say. And jungle drum and bass is now the third genre on Beatport for catalogue, and it's the second best genre for new releases. I just wanted to recap on that because that's incredible growth, and I think that's something that we should be celebrating. Jack, I wanted to come to you to see if you've got any nice nuggets of SoundCloud data you want to share with us as well on the genre.
Yes, we do. About 3 years ago was where we started to see really significant growth in triple-digit figures, to the point where we were having to kind of double-check some of this data to really see if it was accurate, and it was. And specifically in the UK, which is where we were seeing the majority of growth, there was a period where the words drum and bass was the most searched for term in the UK. And unfortunately, what was happening when people were searching for that was that they weren't getting very good results back. And so what it was really doing was just returning anything that had the words drum and bass in it, which is not a lot, actually, when you're trying to find new tracks or artists and labels. That completely redefined how we display search results now. So if you're a young person, often who's gone to a rave, they don't know the artists and the DJs particularly that they saw that night, but they're searching for drum and bass on SoundCloud. They get presented with a bunch of playlists with trending tracks, trending artists, trending labels, and that's kind of being updated constantly in real time. And so drum and bass, really sort of the data that we see from that really informed the way that we enhance and build features around specific genres. And in the US, I think also really important to note, because it's come up a few times, especially kind of the festival circuit and some of the really big sort of US festivals where they have UK artists like, Dimension and Subfocus playing, and they're the most sort of swarmed stages at that time. We're also seeing that growth being reflected in the plays and the listening time. And in the US, for SoundCloud, where hip-hop has predominantly dominated as the #1 genre, which it still is, electronic music is the fastest growing genre in the US, and drum and bass is the sort of second subgenre of electronic in that category of fastest growing electronic. So it's huge on platform, and as a lot of people will know, it's a grassroots platform for growth, for emerging artists, labels, diversity as well. I kind of know that subject kind of came up, and we're still working on hopefully being able to provide the data for the updated version of the report. But from a kind of an angle of diversity, to call out, like Issy Cross and Kenya Grace, Nia Archives, all people that came very highly in the results of ours. It wasn't all just sort of straight white males. And we've done a lot as well to be very conscious of diversity and representation, and giving the spotlight to those artists who sort of aren't typically from the straight white male category. Yeah.
Fantastic. So it's good to hear that there's a lot of growth being charted on SoundCloud as well, which is obviously a different type of platform from the Beatports and others, but really good grassroots growth and really impressive stat as well in terms of the US and electronic music and it being the second highest genre there. I wanted to just throw out to anybody and everybody on the panel looking at the growth of drum and bass internationally as well, and where the emerging markets and opportunities are. We'll cover a bit more of that in the next panel as well, but I'm sure that some of you have got some interesting kind of perspectives in terms of interesting places that, whether it's from a streaming perspective or a general sort of live perspective, you're seeing a real kind of groundswell now of scenes.
We work with lots of labels across the D&B scene, but we see Germany is regularly in the top 3 for pretty much all the labels. I guess a lot of people see that. Revenue-wise, I might be wrong, but I've never really seen the live scene being quite as strong in Germany as it should be versus the streaming stats, which is something I guess that could be balanced out. We're seeing lots of labels growing in China, and again, I know there's always been a strong scene there, and it's very sort of underground hardcore scene there. But the stream levels and the volumes, not necessarily the revenue, are lifting up quite significantly, specifically in the last 12 months for quite a few labels. So I think we're encouraging labels to be at least thinking about those markets and what they're doing.
And Sydney and Perth specifically, the cities that came up in the data that we were looking at, which was like after Birmingham, Manchester, and London, Sydney and Perth were the following cities that had the highest number of streams.
Yeah, I mean, Perth was unusual. Drum and bass is more popular on the west coast of Australia than the east coast, which is a little bit unusual. But, it's interesting. But in general, what we always sort of like advise people is don't focus too much on one market. Drum and bass definitely has a real hotspot in Australia. It over metrics in Australia and New Zealand. It's doing well in Germany, growing in Germany, and doing well in the USA. And obviously the UK is the home market. But it's better to grow globally at a slower rate than to massively grow quickly in one particular market. If you grow particularly strongly in one particular market, it's just algorithmically, the algorithms in services and socials will determine that as an artist or as a genre, it's only popular in one place. So evenly growing in lots of places is better than over-focusing in one particular country.
Did you want to add anything?
About localization, I think they said almost everything, so I can't add anything at the moment. Thank you.
It does feel good. I was just going to add to that with the growing, with the regular waves of the commercial crossover, it does feel that in different markets it's now starting to emerge as a popular trend in those places, and it comes and goes and it ebbs and flows, obviously, but each time it pushes further in those markets. I know it's a well-worn conversation, but in the US at the moment, things are ramping up quite significantly. It's one of the key markets for a lot of labels that we work with. So I guess as those trends come and go, but each time, hopefully, it's building on it, on the level.
I'd just like to add, like from a SoundCloud perspective as well, the kind of funnel of young users coming into the genre is as kind of high or as wide as it's ever been. And, you know, we've worked with some, you know, brands like Crewcast from the UK to kind of specifically try and, you know, help young people, you know, 18-year-olds really sort of be able to go and see the kind of artists that they would normally be priced out of seeing. So, you know, they can't go and afford to go to a Warehouse Project, for example, and see all the, you know, key headliners. So we worked with them on a kind of, it was like a tour of the UK where we did 8 parties across 8 cities, but not in nightclubs. They were, there was a Blockbuster Video, there was a pizzeria, a kebab shop, a bakery. And so it was about sort of taking parties to the community rather than sort of trying to create a destination venue. Yeah, I mean, we sold out these 8 parties in 24 hours, and it was great to see. I went to a couple personally, but to see them completely full of 18-year-olds who knew every single track that was getting played. They knew the lyrics. They were singing along to the bass lines and the tracks that didn't even have lyrics. And so we knew it from a data perspective that there's lots of young people listening to the genre, but it was great to turn up to a party and actually see it in full effect, so that, you know, they're sort of walking the walk, not just talking the talk as well, yeah.
I think SoundCloud is also such an incredible place for like these micro communities to exist online for the subgenres. Like I've connected with people from Japan and Brazil and South Africa who listen to the sound, and
Yeah.
very, very engaging as well. So it's such a great place for these micro communities.
Yeah, micro communities is also something that happens on SoundCloud a lot, right? And we look at the data closely on like a heat map, and we follow the way that people upload music using like hashtags. One of the first sort of genres that we did a big sort of expose on was a genre called plug. And it's a hip hop genre that really started and existed in Atlanta, and it really was only being created and shared between artists in Atlanta with this hashtag plug. And we did a documentary about the main artists from that scene. And then artists from all over the world said, "Oh, I make music that sounds like this, but I didn't know it had a name, you know." And so now there's like Argentinian plug, and there's now a plug and bass scene as well, which is drum and bass, but in this very sort of like DIY melodic, kind of lo-fi way, I guess, of production, where a lot of these people are teenagers making music on their phones, on their iPads, but they're actually playing it out, and they're building whole communities around them, and they don't know that the rest of the world is out there kind of listening to and creating similar music. So what we're trying to do is connect artists and scenes and communities with each other by just building the tools to be able to reach out to each other and talk to each other, and in a lot of cases people have become friends and then collaborators, and then they put nights on, and then scenes go from being exclusive to a city to then being something much more international.
That's really interesting, because that sort of touches back to something that came up in the first panel as well about, you know, the history of jungle and drum and bass, and the origins of it were where you had pockets of music springing up in different towns across the UK, and people didn't necessarily know that they were kind of making a similar type of music in Bristol or London or Oxford or Nottingham. So, and it's interesting that that's happening again now with the micro communities as well. I just wanted to touch on the mainstream versus the underground as well, because, you know, it's been well documented that, you know, drum and bass is having a moment, like we haven't had any moments in the last 30 plus years, but we are having a moment now, and that moment seems to be lasting quite some time. It hasn't yet peaked. One of the things that's come out of that is in the last 3 years, I think the data's shown that major labels have sort of, you know, they're riding the crest, this latest crest of the wave, and they're responsible for more of the chart, you know, chart releases and chart placings that are happening for drum and bass. I just wanted to get some perspective, maybe Matt, you want to come in on this as well, about, you know, that whole cycle of mainstream and underground, and from Hospital and a label perspective, obviously a label that's been going for 30 years, how is that looking for you guys? And do you see the crest of the wave breaking, or do you think actually that, you know, we are just in a growth period that's going to continue?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, like you say, it's definitely not the first moment that drum and bass has had, and I'm sure it's not going to be the last. But ultimately, you know, personally, I think it can only be a good thing, right? You know, it's more eyes on the genre, and whether that's an artist playing at a festival or, you know, show that you wouldn't necessarily find drum and bass at, or whether that's a drum and bass song being played on a radio station where you wouldn't necessarily hear it. I mean, I remember my mum was quite angry that Badadan was being played on Heart FM.
Was it really?
Yeah. So she wasn't too pleased with that. But, I mean, you know, that in itself is quite incredible if you think about it. So ultimately, you know, it's when those moments happen, that could change one person's life, and they could then sort of scratch beneath the surface and find this whole world of drum and bass, or that could do that to 1,000 people. So, you know, it's definitely a great thing. And I think, personally, I feel like maybe that crest is breaking a little bit. I just kind of have that feeling. It seems like sort of the bigger dogs out there maybe sniffing around sort of like UKG and 140 into 2025. And it feels like there's a lot of narrative in drum and bass at the moment of things going back to their roots, you know, getting back in the small underground, dark, sweaty clubs, and sort of musically as well, things sort of, yeah, just going back to where they came from a little bit more. So that's kind of my perspective on it all.
Yeah, it was you know, when drum and bass first came into existence back in the 90s, you know, there was the mainstream, and then there was the underground. And the underground was really, really small, you know, because it was, for most DJs, for most artists in any genre of music, it was impossible to release music unless you were signed to a record label. And there were some record labels which were underground, not that many, and there were some which were majors, and they were mainstream. Today, anybody can release music. The underground has got so big. You know, it's possible to actually, for any single type of music, to engage audiences these days. Back in the 90s, you know, the main avenue for releasing drum and bass was mixtapes, generally recorded by people like me, plugging in a DAT player at events they were promoting, and then flogging the cassettes to people afterwards. You know, that was how drum and bass really got into people's hands to listen to at home. The other place where they listened was in the clubs.
But I think, sorry.
No, go ahead. I'll chime in.
Sorry, I think Yann wants to come in.
Yeah, if you're okay, I would even like to go back until 2020. If we speak about mainstream and drum and bass, in my perspective as a Beatport curator, it was the first year of the COVID and the lockdown. But surprisingly, that was the first big rise of drum and bass. If I do remember, even UKF wrote an article about that. It was not only Beatport, it was SoundCloud, Juno and everything. And the sound at this period, I guess the fact that people had to stay home, there was less banger, singles, summer tunes. And I think producers started to produce something more personal, also more album, EPs of 4 to 8 tracks. And finally, during this rise, the top 10 of Beatport was super dynamic. The number one was changing all the time. And it was less trusted by major or main artists. After the COVID, for sure, the party came back, the club were reopened again. Some big artists came back in again. But what I can notice at the moment when we are asking if it's going to keep growing or not, it's a predominance right now of major, especially in the top 10, top 20 of Beatport. And I think, for instance, this week you have a track of Don Diablo or one of Tiesto, Armin van Buuren, and some main artists which are not drum and bass specialists are right now coming into the game and they are trusting the charts super hardly. And it's right now more difficult for the underground drum and bass at Beatport to reach out to the top 10.
But that's partly kind of what I was going to touch on, that we're also seeing these sort of two types of mainstream, right? So there's the mainstream of, like very legitimate origin acts like Chase and Status, bringing, great drum and bass to a mainstream audience. But then there are these moments happening at places like Ultra, and there might be a DJ, like Tiesto's or Afrojack, who are playing a drum and bass track in their set, and it's going off really kind of well received in the audience, but the people who actually own those labels or that particular track, suddenly it's over for them. They're, and speaking personally with some of the people who released some of that music that got played by those DJs at those types of festivals, were like, we actually don't want to be totally associated with that at all. And so we're going to fall back onto our sort of plan B, which is our, UK garage and, sort of speed garage stuff, which we've been signing over the last 6 months and now ready to release and change direction. So it's really interesting, like how kind of fiercely protective or, overprotective some people are in terms of embracing the genre, or the fact that, a DJ played one of their tracks at a commercial festival means that that genre is just in the bin for them, was, quite surprising to hear. But also, they're totally sticking by their guns and they're not in it for the money or anything else. And that was the proof was that they didn't see it as actually being helpful for them or for the scene. They thought it was, bandwagon jumping, which, it partly was. So I think it's very subjective to approach that. The subject of big DJs who normally wouldn't play that genre, playing that genre at a festival, and the reaction it gets from not the crowd, but the people who were responsible for making and releasing that music.
Right, so it's the dichotomy, I suppose, of big name DJs playing a genre that is popular with the crowd, but then other people kind of being protective and saying, well, it's not your place to play that. Is it a good thing because it broadens drum and bass out to new audiences? Many of us would argue, yes, it is. Understand also the purists kind of, wanting it not to be taken into a different direction or morphed into something else. We're about to run out of time, but Romy, you wanted to make a point.
I was just going to say, hopefully a positive is that the revenue growth we saw across lots of labels last year, a lot of that was driven by catalogue. So hopefully that is these people that you mentioned who are then digging deeper into the catalogue, and the knock-on effect is actually they're discovering all of that music hidden much further down in the catalogues of those labels. But that's had a significant uplift over the last few years for the labels that we work with. So hopefully that's a sign of them digging deeper.
I think it's possible to coexist, right? Like, while the genre itself is globalizing, it's reaching so many people, it's kind of difficult to keep it still protective and like how we think it should be played out. And I think it's very beautifully possible, both the things to coexist and for it to reach more and more people. And I think that's what's happening when we're seeing pockets in Japan and China growing. It's spreading and people are embracing it more and more. If Afrojack is playing drum and bass track, I think it's just reaching more ears, and hopefully more audiences will come into the genre and discover the roots of it. So yeah, I think it's a positive.
I would like to add that at Beatport, all curators are humans, and you have my word that I know that I'm supposed to represent the whole spectrum, but small labels, underground artists, please send everything, because I'm listening to everything, and my role is also to highlight you. So please, long life to the underground as well.
Thank you, Yann. So we're going to wrap up this section. I think key takeaways is drum and bass jungle has been growing. It's reaching new audiences. It's reaching new markets. There is space for the underground and the mainstream to coexist, and independent and small labels and new producers are very much welcomed to the platforms here. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.